What the fuck is that? A fucking Ludicolo?
Wait till you see the. No.
No one likes it. And I think some people can identify why, but for those of you who can't quite put your finger on why you think it's weird, we're going to talk about that in just a minute. I think I have the answer for you. We're just going to take a breath here. We're going to talk about it, all right, from a subjective but an academic standpoint. So, this all kind of falls under the umbrella of converting cartoon characters into a hyper-realistic style. Now, when did this really become relevant in our culture? Now, you can say that the first example of this is like the Hulk TV show from the 70s. I'm not familiar with the show at all. I'm not going to pretend that I am. My parents talk about it. But yeah, that's like the earliest example that I can think of where they took a two-dimensional character, cartoon character, comic book character, and converted it into a real-world setting. Why they did it, I couldn't tell you. Does it look good? No. I don't think people at the time thought it looked good. But anyway, the earliest example that I'm familiar with, that I'm very familiar with, that I experienced growing up as it was coming out, was the 2002 Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie and its two sequels. Now, this was a very successful movie, a very popular movie. A lot of people were excited for it, and it set a lot of trends for comic book movies, which have been incredibly popular over the past decade or so. And it kind of established these tropes that we're used to seeing in these kinds of movies. Now, why weren't people uncomfortable with a hyper-realistic Spider-Man, a Spider-Man existing in a real world? Well, Spider-Man, as it was originally written, as the character was originally written and designed for, lives in New York City. He lives in the real world. He's a real human being that gets bitten by a radioactive spider. So the designers of this character, the writers of the world, and the people who came up with the idea of what he was going to look like, they had it in their head already that this was going to exist in a world very similar to ours. Not Earth exactly, but it's a version of Earth. And the world was designed to be like a mirror to our own world. For a kid to look at this and say, hey, I'm like Peter Parker. You know, I could do great things one day. And that was part of the intent. So the character was designed to look like a real human. Of course, he was stylized because it was a comic book character, but Spider-Man has been drawn so many different ways over so many different years, you know, you can interpret him so many different ways. One of those ways you could interpret him is as a real human, and this kind of makes sense, right? Because like I was just saying, that was the character designer's original intent. They wanted him to seem like a real human. So if you just took an actual guy, Tobey Maguire, who personally I don't think is a good Peter Parker, but that's a completely different story. Take Tobey Maguire and put him in a Spider-Man suit, and no one's going to complain about that because we're already used to seeing Spider-Man as a human in the real world. Now, we're not used to seeing him actually on camera in an actual film with an actual actor portraying him, but when we do see it, it doesn't perturb us, and it makes sense. Now, another very successful movie franchise that did this, that also is from the early 2000s, is the Transformers, the Michael Bay Transformers movie. All of those movies, there are like 5 of them, I think. And these were also incredibly successful movies. I know they're also a conversation point, a topic of hot debate and controversy among fans of the original franchise. You know, moviegoers, movie critics, all of these people. Whatever, we're not going to talk about that right now. All we need to know is that they did the same thing, and they did it successfully. These movies were very successful, obviously. They made like 5 of them. But they didn't do the exact same thing that Spider-Man did. If you look at the original Transformers, the cartoon from the 70s, the 80s, I'll fact check that. I'm not 100% sure. I've never seen it. I was born in 1996. I'm not going to pretend that I was watching shows from the 1980s, 1970s. I just wasn't. And so the original characters were designed to sell toys. There's a lot of cartoon franchises from the 70s and 80s were intended to do. They were toys. They were 20-minute long ads for toys. So the characters, the Transformers themselves, were designed not only to look cool for the kids, but mostly they were designed so that you could actually manufacture these toys, have them work as transforming robots into cars and trucks and boats or whatever, and for them to be able to be animated. And now, of course, animating back in the 70s and 80s was a lot harder than it is now. You had to draw out everything cell by cell, so they had to make sure that these characters were not too overcomplicated. They were basically a bunch of squares. And it worked for the time, because kids didn't care that these weren't overcomplicated, over-designed characters. They just liked the toys transformed from cars into robots and back and forth, and that's what makes them so iconic, and that's why we know and love them today. So that makes sense. Now, when they decided to make this movie, this real-world setting Transformers movie, they had a decision to make. They could either do what Spider-Man did, not change much, almost nothing about the design of the character and just put it in a real-world setting, or redesign the characters so that they look like they belong in the real world. And that's what they did. They took these original designs, Optimus Prime, for example, and instead of making him a bunch of squares that was intentionally designed to be easy to animate and easy to manufacture, they took this idea and they said, listen, we don't have these restrictions anymore. We can make this look almost however we want it to. And this is going to exist in the real world, so how can we redesign this and reimagine it so that it makes sense in the real world? And we have to take into consideration that, when these things are going to be actually transforming, we can't just have them fold up in a box. We want to be able to use all of the components of a car to be part of the shot as this thing, sort of unfolds and evolves and turns from the car into the machine. We want to take advantage of that, and we can. So, they studied car parts and they, figured out, okay, if we took off this part here and we can make a chest plate out of that, the headlights will go here. And they redesigned the characters to not only fit in a realistic world, but to look good in a realistic world. Now, of course, again, subjective opinion. I think the Transformers themselves look cool in this movie. It's probably my favorite part about these movies. I think the Transformers look really cool. I like the way they adapted these initial ideas and concepts into a real-world setting. I think they did that very successfully. Whether or not the movies are good, that's a whole different story. So that's Transformers, and that's another reason why movie directors and producers wanted to follow in this trend of adapting comic books and cartoons into hyper-realistic movies. Why Michael Bay wanted to do it in the first place, I couldn't really tell you. Maybe it's something to do with Spider-Man. Maybe it was just cheap to get the rights to Transformers in 2005. I don't know. But he did it, and that's where we are. So now, Sonic and Detective Pikachu. These two movies, I think they're both coming out this year. Why are people having this response to them? Why are people immediately saying, this looks weird, this looks uncomfortable, this looks gross, I don't like it, get it away from me? Why are people saying this? Well, let's talk about source material. You got Sonic. Kind of a confusing source material because the initial game for Sonic was very simple. It was 2D platformer, run as fast as you can, obstacles, enemies, bosses, what have you. His original design for it was very, very simple, as a lot of 2D platformer characters are designed to be. You needed to be able to be visible from a distance, and you needed to be cute, marketable, and child-friendly. And his design had to reflect speed. He had to reflect his ability to jump, turn into a ball. You follow his red feet because even as fast as he's moving, you can still see his red feet. Super saturated blue will stand out almost any background the game designers wanted to put him on. And that's why he looks the way he does. Now, of course, Sonic has, throughout the official franchise of his games and his TV shows, taken on a lot of different forms. You got the cartoons from the 90s that pretty much keep him the way he looks in the first few video games, very round and simplified. Then you got like the Sonic X, where he's like more anime, and they made him a little bit longer. In Sonic Adventures, some of those video games where they were reinterpreting him in a 3D style, they made him a lot different. Not a lot different, but different enough that it's easy to tell the difference between 2005 Sonic and 1992 Sonic. But initially, Sonic was designed to exist in this 2D platformer world. Now, Pokemon, I can speak to far more because I'm far more familiar with Pokemon, and I am much more familiar with the source material. And the source material is a lot more coherent. It's a fantasy world. Doesn't take place on Earth. Doesn't want to pretend to take place on Earth. It draws some inspiration from some things that we're familiar with on Earth, but it's not Earth. It's not our human world. We're not used to seeing even real humans. All the humans we're familiar with in Pokemon are either anime characters or super simplified, cartoon characters. It's not Earth. And the designs of the Pokemon themselves, they're not supposed to look like they can exist in the real world. Yes, they borrow inspiration from things that we know in the real world, but they're designed to break all of those conventions. Now, Detective Pikachu, the movie. Let's say we were sitting down at a table, we were making a live-action Pokemon movie. What are we going to do with it? Well, we could do the Transformers route, the Michael Bay Transformers design choice, where we redesign characters based off of the original concepts to fit into a real-world setting. We could do that. They didn't want to do that with Detective Pikachu, for whatever reason. They didn't think that they could sacrifice the iconic look of Pokemon and redesign something to fit in a hyper-realistic world. Instead, what they did is they took the character and they kept everything about it. They kept the silhouette, the colors, the shapes of the design, all of those things they kept, and they just slapped on some hyper-realistic textures like fur and slime and scale and feathers, and that's it. And that's all they did. And you can say that the reason that they did that is because they wanted people to be able to recognize the characters, but here's the thing. Pokemon weren't designed with anatomy in mind. We weren't supposed to be thinking about the muscles under Charizard's chest. We weren't supposed to be thinking about what the tongue of Lickitung looks like if it actually was in our world, or maybe the fact that Ludicolo is covered in fur, is it feathers? Whatever it is, I don't want to think about that. They weren't designed to have people thinking about that. They were designed to be easy to understand. They have to be easy to animate because they're going to be in TV shows, they're going to be in video games. The original designs had to be so simple because they were going to be on the Game Boy, which has very limited graphics capabilities. So they had to design these things simple enough so that you could recognize them on a Game Boy. So putting them in this world and not changing anything about them other than the textures looks very bizarre, because the original intent of the designers was not to have them interpreted in the real world. And when you put them in the real world and don't change anything about the way they look other than their textures, it looks strange. Now, Sonic. Sonic kind of did do the Transformers thing. They did redesign Sonic. Instead of just taking the cute, round guy that we're used to seeing from the original game and just slapping fur texture on him, they redesigned him. But it still doesn't work. And really, the fact of the matter is that there isn't really a good way to do that with Sonic. Because he wasn't designed to exist in the real world. For whatever reason, sometimes he does, but when he does, the rest of the world is stylized around his art direction. So, to take Sonic and put him in with a bunch of humans and say, this is the real world, here he is on the Golden Gate Bridge, it's gonna look weird no matter what you do, because he doesn't belong in this world. I mean, that first poster when we saw his calves and his ankles, and thank God we didn't see his crotch, but we have to think about that now because this is the design choices that they've made for this movie and this character. It just looks like a bad fursuit. Now, how to fix it. Here's my solution, and it's very simple. Just don't make a live-action movie. You can make a huge, grandiose feature film about either of these two franchises. and I guarantee you it'll do well. But it doesn't have to be live action. It could be animated. And I'm not saying animated like the way that all of the Pokemon movies before this have been. Not 2D anime. You can make it 3D animated. Make it like, you know, a Disney movie or a Pixar movie or a DreamWorks movie or, you know, Illumination. Even Blue Sky. Get one of these guys out here that's very comfortable with character rendering in a 3D setting and get them to reimagine Pokemon and Sonic. All I'm saying is 3D animated movies do well. I don't know if it's for money reasons. I don't know why you're afraid to do a 3D animated movie. I mean, you're spending the budget on animation and character design anyway because you have to animate these 3D characters, and it's gonna do just as well. I mean, for God's sake, Spider-Man won an Academy Award, and that movie was incredible. That's all I'm saying. That is my slightly organized rant about this whole situation. And please let me know if we have anyone out there who is excited for this movie and who likes these designs. Let me know. Honestly, I'd like to hear the opinion of someone who thinks that these designs, you know, make sense and are successful, because I'm interested to hear that perspective. I don't know anyone who is excited about that, but that doesn't mean that opinion doesn't exist or that opinion is invalid. It totally is. And I want to hear from those people. So please let me know. If you want to rant with me, go ahead, rant in the comments. Just, you know, keep it civil. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, share it with a friend, and we will talk again soon. Yeah. That's it. I got nothing else. I'm really thirsty because I was talking very aggressively, and my mouth is dry, so I'm gonna get a drink of water. Yeah.
Hurry up and come.